The air in the grand cathedral was thick with the scent of lilies and hypocrisy. Catherine Davenport, swathed in black Venetian lace, played the part of the grieving widow to perfection, her sobs echoing in the vaulted ceilings. But her performance shattered the moment a woman in charcoal gray silk with a smile that didn't reach her eyes slipped into the front pew. The Mistress. A gasp rippled through the pews of Boston's elite. Catherine's grief morphed into a primal rage, a shriek tearing through the solemn eulogy. "Get her out! Get that woman out of my husband's funeral!" The Mistress. Sophia simply smoothed her skirt, her smile unwavering. She knew something they didn't. She knew that the real drama wasn't in this church, but locked in a vault waiting for a lawyer to turn the key on a will that would burn their entire world to the ground. The October rain fell in a relentless, mournful sheet against the stained glass windows of St. Cecilia's Cathedral in Boston. It was a fittingly somber day for the funeral of Richard Davenport, a man who had carved his name into the city's skyline with towers of steel and glass, and into its society pages with equal parts philanthropy and scandal. Inside, the air was heavy and cold, a mix of funereal flowers, damp wool, and the cloying scent of old money. At the front, in the position of honor she had occupied for 25 years, sat Catherine Davenport. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of sorrow, was framed by a black veil. Beside her, their children Daniel and Chloe formed a tableau of youthful grief. Daniel at 24 was a stoic miniature version of his father, his jaw tight with the effort of containment. Chloe, 21, was her mother's echo, her delicate shoulders shaking with silent, performative sobs. The pews were a who's who of the eastern seaboard. Banking scions, political figures, and rivals in real estate all gathered to pay their respects, their hushed whispers, a low hum beneath the organ's mournful drone. They spoke of Richard's ruthlessness, his vision, his unassailable legacy. They spoke of his assets, his portfolio, his empire. They spoke of everything but the one subject that truly occupied their thoughts. Catherine felt their eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She had been a perfect corporate wife. She had hosted the fundraisers, charmed the investors, and overlooked the whispers that had followed Richard like a shadow for the last 5 years. The whispers had a name: Sophia Reed. The eulogy began delivered by Richard's oldest friend and business partner, Marcus Thorne. He spoke of Richard's drive, his early struggles, the sheer force of will that built Davenport Corporation from a single leveraged property into a multi-billion-dollar behemoth. He was a builder. Marcus intoned his voice thick with emotion. He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. It was at that moment, as Marcus paused for effect, that the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral swung open. A collective, subtle shift in posture rippled through the congregation. A woman stood silhouetted against the gray, rainy light. She was tall, poised, and wore a tailored suit of charcoal gray silk that clung to her form with an understated elegance that screamed defiance. She wore no veil. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, immaculate chignon, and on her lips was the faintest trace of a smile. Sophia Reed. She walked down the aisle, not with the tentative steps of an outcast, but with the measured, confident stride of someone who belonged. The whispers grew from a hum to an audible murmur. Chloe gasped, grabbing her mother's arm. Daniel's stony expression hardened into a glare. Sophia ignored them all, Her eyes were fixed on the mahogany casket draped in a blanket of white roses. She reached the front, and to the collective shock of everyone present, slid gracefully into the empty space at the end of the family pew, as if the seat had been saved just for her. The silence was a physical thing, a crushing weight that suffocated the cathedral. Marcus Thorne faltered mid-sentence, his words dying in his throat. All eyes darted between the stoic, smiling mistress and the veiled, trembling wife. For a long moment, Catherine remained perfectly still. She could feel the blood pounding in her temples, a hot, roaring tide of humiliation. This was her stage, her performance of grief, her final public act as the wife of Richard Davenport. And this woman, this parasite, had dared to defile it. The meticulously crafted composure Catherine had worn like armor for 2 decades cracked, then shattered completely. She rose to her feet, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper, but a raw, guttural shriek that ripped through the sacred silence. No, heads snapped towards her. The organist's fingers froze over the keys. "Get her out!" Catherine screamed, pointing a trembling, black-gloved finger at Sophia. Her veil had fallen askew, revealing eyes wild with a fury that was anything but dignified. "Get that woman out of my husband's funeral. She does not belong here. She is nothing." The outburst was so visceral, so out of character for the ever-poised Catherine Davenport, that it stunned the crowd into immobility. Daniel shot to his feet, grabbing his mother's arm. "Mother, please sit down. Not here." But Catherine was beyond reason. "Did you hear me?" she shrieked at the ushers who stood frozen in the aisles. "Remove her. This is my family's grief, my husband, mine, through it all." Sophia Reed did not flinch. She simply turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting Catherine's across the short distance. The small, enigmatic smile remained fixed on her lips. It was not a smile of triumph or of malice. It was a smile of unnerving, absolute confidence, a smile that said, "You have no idea what's coming." It was the smile of a person who held the winning hand and was simply waiting for the final card to be dealt. The chaos erupted around her, but she remained an island of calm, a silent testament to a secret only she and the man in the casket seemed to share. 3 days later, the oppressive atmosphere had merely shifted location. The air in the conference room of Finch and Gable attorneys at law was as stale and heavy as it had been in the cathedral. The firm occupied the top floor of a granite building in the financial district, a bastion of old-world power, with dark mahogany walls, brass fittings, and portraits of stern-faced founders dating back to the 19th century. The room overlooked the harbor, but heavy velvet curtains were drawn, trapping the tension within the 4 walls. At the head of a long, polished table sat Alistair Finch. He was a man who seemed to be carved from the same aged wood as his office furniture, thin, impeccably dressed in a 3-piece suit, with a face that had been trained over 40 years to betray no emotion whatsoever. He had been Richard Davenport's personal lawyer, his executor, and some whispered his only true confidant. Arranged around the table was the same cast of characters from the funeral, minus the audience. Catherine, her face pale and pinched, sat flanked by Daniel and Chloe. Her sister Margaret was there for moral support, her hand resting protectively on Catherine's shoulder. They formed a tight, hostile unit on one side of the table. Directly opposite them, alone, sat Sophia Reed. Today, she was dressed in a navy blue sheath dress, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. The confident smile from the funeral was gone, replaced by a cool, professional neutrality. She looked not like a grieving mistress, but like a CEO about to enter a difficult negotiation. Alistair Finch cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He adjusted his spectacles and looked at the tense faces before him. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As the executor of Richard Davenport's estate, it is my duty to read the contents of his last will and testament. I must stress that Richard was very specific in his instructions that all parties named herein be present for this reading." His gaze flickered for a fraction of a second towards Sophia. Catherine bristled. "Let's get this over with, Alistair. I see no reason why she said, her voice dripping with venom as she gestured towards Sophia, needs to be here to hear how my husband provided for his lawful family." Finch ignored the interruption. "Richard's estate is, as you know, complex. He has made provisions in 2 separate documents. First, we will address the primary will, which has been filed with the probate court, and is a matter of public record." He slid a thick, bound document to the center of the table. He began to read in a dry, legal monotone. It was for the most part exactly what Catherine and her children had expected. The vast Davenport fortune was to be managed through a family trust. The Beacon Hill Mansion, the summer estate in Nantucket, the art collection, and a portfolio of stocks and bonds were left to Catherine, my beloved wife of 25 years. Daniel and Chloe were named as primary beneficiaries of the trust upon their mother's passing, and were given significant individual bequests to be paid out immediately. Daniel was also to be given a non-executive seat on the board of Davenport Corporation. As Finch read, a wave of relief washed over Catherine. A smug, vindicated look settled on her features. She shot a triumphant glare at Sophia. It was all hers. The empire, the legacy, the name. She had won. The public humiliation at the funeral would fade, but the money and power would remain. Richard had done his duty. Chloe reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. Daniel, however, remained impassive, his eyes fixed on Finch, a flicker of suspicion in his gaze. He knew his father. Richard Davenport never did anything the simple way. When Finch finished reading the last clause of the main will, he carefully set the document aside. Catherine sat back in her chair, a sigh of satisfaction escaping her lips. "Well," she said, her voice sharp and dismissive. "That seems to be in order. I assume Miss Reed's presence is no longer required." Sophia did not move. Her eyes were locked on Alistair Finch. Finch held up a hand. "That was the first document, Catherine. As I said, there are 2. He reached into his leather briefcase and retrieved a single large envelope made of thick, cream-colored parchment. It was sealed with a heavy, dark red wax seal imprinted with the Davenport family crest. "What is that?" Daniel asked, leaning forward. "This," Finch said, placing the envelope carefully on the table, "is what Richard referred to as his final testament and directive. It is a private codicil, notarized and legally binding. His explicit instructions were that it was to be unsealed and read only in this room with all of you present. Its contents supersede any conflicting clauses in the primary will." A cold dread began to seep into the room, chilling the air. Catherine's triumphant expression vanished, replaced by a mask of confusion and alarm. "A private codicil? I knew nothing of this. What could it possibly say that wasn't in the will? I am not privy to its contents," Finch stated, though his eyes suggested otherwise. "I was instructed only to witness its signing and sealing, and to execute this meeting." He picked up a small, ornate silver letter opener from his desk. The sound of the blade slicing through the thick parchment was unnaturally loud, a surgical incision into the heart of the Davenport family's carefully constructed reality. Catherine stared at the sealed envelope, as if it were a venomous snake. The smug victory she had felt only moments before had evaporated replaced by a primal fear. Richard had been a master strategist, a man who thought 10 moves ahead in business and in life. This was not a simple addendum. This was his final move from beyond the grave. And across the table, for the first time since she had entered the room, Sophia Reed allowed herself the barest hint of a smile. She didn't know the exact words written on the pages within, but she knew the man who had written them. And she knew that Richard Davenport always saved his most devastating play for last. Alistair Finch carefully extracted several pages of the same thick, cream-colored paper from the mutilated envelope. He unfolded them, cleared his throat, and began to read. But the voice that filled the silent room was not Finch's dry monotone. The words on the page were Richard's own, a direct address from the grave, and Finch read them with the dispassionate clarity of a messenger delivering a verdict. To my family, and to Sophia. If you are hearing this, then I am gone, and the public mourning is complete. The niceties have been observed. Now it is time for the truth. I have structured this final testament as a letter because the cold language of law cannot convey the reasons for the decisions I have made. It is imperative you understand the foundation upon which your inheritance, or lack thereof, is built. Finch paused, his eyes scanning the faces around the table. Catherine was rigid, her knuckles white, where she gripped the arms of her chair. I will begin with you, Catherine. Finch continued reading from the letter. For 25 years we have played our parts. You, the graceful society wife. I, the ambitious tycoon. It was for a time a successful merger. Your family name provided the access I needed, and my success provided the lifestyle you craved. We were an excellent business partnership. But do not delude yourself into believing it was anything more not for the last 15 years. A sharp, wounded gasp escaped Chloe's lips. Mother, what is he talking about? Catherine waved her away, her eyes blazing with fury at the lawyer. This is slander. Richard would never. Do not interrupt, Catherine. Finch read Richard's voice, seemingly anticipating her protest. Let us not pretend. Our vows became void the night you sought comfort in the arms of Stephen Lattimore in our Nantucket home, believing I was in Hong Kong, and the year after that with the tennis pro in Palm Beach. Did you think I was a fool? Did you think the man who built an information empire from nothing wouldn't know what transpired under his own roof? I have the dates, the hotel receipts, the private investigators' reports. They are in a safe deposit box at the Boston First National Bank, the key to which is in Mr. Finch's possession. They are my insurance against any challenge you might consider mounting against this directive. The room fell into a deathly silence. Chloe stared at her mother, her face a canvas of disbelief and horror. Daniel looked down at the table, his expression unreadable. Catherine's face had gone from pale to ashen. The foundation of her righteous indignation, her carefully cultivated image as the wronged wife, had just been dynamited. She was exposed, and the architect of her exposure was the very man she was supposed to be mourning. The letter continued, each word a hammer blow. Your infidelity was not the cause of our estrangement, Catherine. It was a symptom. The cause was your soul-deep worship of illusion. You fell in love not with me, but with the idea of being Mrs. Richard Davenport. You cared for the status, the galas, the photo ops, the name on the buildings. You never once cared about the work, the risk, the sacrifice that built it all. You saw the empire as your birthright, a treasure chest to be spent, not a living entity to be nurtured. Finch turned a page. The air was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. Therefore, your inheritance will reflect the nature of our partnership. You will retain the Beacon Hill mansion, It is the stage upon which you have performed so brilliantly for so long, and it is only fitting you keep it. You will also receive a lifetime stipend of $500,000 per year. It is more than enough to maintain your lifestyle, your charities, and your social standing. It is a generous severance package for a long-term business partner. Catherine's breath hitched. A stipend. A severance package. It was an insult. A fortune, yes, but a pittance compared to the billions she had considered her own. However, Finch read the word hanging in the air. As of the reading of this letter, you are immediately and irrevocably removed from the board of the Davenport Corporation Family Trust. You will have no voting rights, no executive power, and no say in the future of the company I built. Your access to the corporate accounts is terminated effective immediately. You wanted the trappings of the empire, Catherine. You may have them, but you will not touch the empire itself. It was a masterful, cruel stroke. Richard hadn't cut her off completely. He had left her a golden cage. He had given her the wealth to continue playing the part of Catherine Davenport. But he had stripped her of all real power, publicly neutering her in front of her children and her rival. The scream from the funeral was nothing compared to the silent, strangled cry trapped in her throat now. She had been demoted, reclassified from queen to pensioner in a matter of paragraphs. Her entire identity, built over a quarter of a century, had been dismantled by the posthumous words of a husband who had apparently seen through her all along. Alistair Finch paused, allowing the weight of Richard's decree to settle upon Catherine. She sat in stunned, silent fury, her world crumbling around her. Then Finch adjusted his spectacles, found his place on the page, and the tone of the letter underwent a seismic shift. "And now, Sophia," he read the words, suddenly imbued with a warmth and intimacy that was jarringly absent from the section addressed to Catherine. "They see you as the other woman, the homewrecker. They believe you are a secret I kept. The truth is, you were the secret I lived." Catherine made a choking sound, a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Chloe buried her face in her hands. Daniel, however, leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. He was a businessman, and he sensed this was a pivot from personal grievance to corporate strategy. "The world and my own family believes the Davenport Corporation was born from the seed money provided by Catherine's father." Finch continued reading Richard's words. "That is the lie we agreed to tell. It was a useful fiction that opened doors in this city of pedigree and old blood. The truth, Sophia, is that her father's loan was a pittance, a cautious, insulting investment that barely covered the legal fees. The real capital, the high-risk loan that allowed me to purchase the South Boston warehouse district, the deal that made everything else possible, was secured because of you." But Sophia's expression remained neutral, but there was a new light in her eyes. It was the quiet glow of validation. "You were a 25-year-old architectural analyst at a rival firm back then. You saw the potential in that derelict waterfront when everyone else saw urban blight. You drafted the initial revitalization proposal, the economic forecast, the very vision for what would become Davenport Plaza. You brought it to me not as a mistress, but as a brilliant strategist who was being ignored by her stuffy, short-sighted bosses. We secured the funding together. We built it together. The lie was that Catherine's family funded my dream. The truth is, you were my dream." The revelation landed in the room like a physical blow. Daniel stared openly at Sophia, reassessing everything he thought he knew. This woman wasn't just a late-in-life dalliance. She was part of the company's origin story, a foundational myth he had never known. "Over the years," the letter went on, "your role was never just personal. You were my silent partner, my chief strategist, my most trusted advisor. Every daring acquisition, every innovative design, from the Helios Tower to the new quantum tech campus, that was our work. While Catherine was planning galas, you and I were in the office until 3 a.m., planning a skyline. Richard's posthumous confession was relentless. He wasn't just rewriting his personal history, he was rewriting the entire corporate history of the Davenport Corporation. Which brings me to the matter of your inheritance. I cannot give you my name. The laws and societal conventions we navigated in life prevent that. But I can and will give you what is rightfully yours. I am not leaving you a gift, Sophia. I am repaying a debt and recognizing a partnership. Finch turned another page. His voice was steady, but the words he spoke were revolutionary. The Davenport Corporation is a vast entity, but its future, its most profitable and innovative arm, is the subsidiary known as Davenport Future Ventures, the division overseeing all our tech, green energy, and smart city projects. It is the engine of our growth for the next 50 years. Its current valuation is approximately $2.8 billion. He paused. As of this moment, I bequeath my entire controlling interest of 51% of Davenport Future Ventures to Sophia Reed. She will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer and Chairwoman of the board effective immediately. The existing board has been notified. This is not negotiable. It is done. If the room had been silent before, it was now a vacuum. Catherine looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. $2.8 billion. Not just money, but control. The heart of the company. The future. He had given it to her. Chloe finally found her voice, a high-pitched, incredulous cry. He gave it to her. The whole thing. That's our money, that's our future. But Richard wasn't finished. He had one more secret to reveal, a final devastating twist of the knife aimed directly at Catherine's pride. Let me be clear why this is necessary. Finch read the final words of this section, ringing with an ice-cold finality. Last year, when we were seeking final funding for the Helios Tower, our most ambitious project to date, a crucial investor unexpectedly pulled out, nearly bankrupting the project. I discovered the reason. The investor had received an anonymous tip filled with half-truths and doctored risk assessments, suggesting the project was a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. It took me 6 months and a team of forensic accountants to trace the source of that anonymous leak. It came from a shell corporation that was funded through an offshore account. An account, Catherine, that I had set up for your personal use years ago. He looked up from the page, his eyes meeting Catherine's. You tried to sabotage my magnum opus, your own family's legacy. Whether out of jealousy of Sophia's involvement or simple, spiteful ignorance, I do not know. But I do know this: you cannot be trusted with the future I built. Sophia can. This company was founded on her vision. It is only right that it continues to be guided by it. The truth was finally out. Sophia Reed wasn't the woman who had tried to destroy the Davenport family. According to Richard, she was the one who had built it, and Catherine was the one who had tried to tear it down. The aftershocks of the revelations about Sophia and Catherine were still reverberating through the room when Alistair Finch turned to the final pages of Richard's letter. The focus now shifted to the two people who had been caught in the crossfire of their parents' bitter war, Daniel and Chloe. To my children, Finch began, Richard's tone shifting once more. It was no longer angry, as it had been with Catherine, or loving, as with Sophia. It was the practical, instructional tone of a father who saw his children less as family and more as assets to be managed. I have not left you destitute. I am not a monster, but I am also not a fool. I will not enable a life of idle inherited luxury that breeds weakness. You will inherit your fortune, but you will earn your legacy." Daniel sat up straighter, his expression a mixture of apprehension and intrigue. Chloe, still reeling from the accusations against her mother, looked on with tear-filled, resentful eyes. "I have established 2 separate, irrevocable trusts. One in the name of Daniel Davenport, and one in the name of Chloe Davenport. Each trust is funded with $500 million in liquid assets, stocks, and real estate holdings." A collective, sharp intake of breath. $1 billion split between them. It was a staggering sum, a king's ransom. For a fleeting moment, relief flickered across Chloe's face. This at least was a comfort, a validation of their status as his children. But they should have known better. With Richard Davenport, there was always a condition. "However," Finch read, and the weight of that single word fell upon them again. "Access to the principal of these trusts will be restricted. You will receive a yearly allowance from the interest sufficient for a comfortable life. But the principal, the $500 million core, will remain locked. It will not be released to you until a specific condition has been met. A single, non-negotiable condition." All eyes were on Finch. Even Sophia seemed to be holding her breath, unsure of what Richard's final gambit would be. "To unlock your inheritance, you must both accept and successfully hold a position within Davenport Future Ventures. You will report directly to the new CEO, Ms. Sophia Reed. You will work under her leadership. You will learn the business, my real business, from the ground up, not from the comfort of a legacy board seat. This condition is not a punishment. It is your education." It was diabolical, a stroke of posthumous genius that was both a test and a trap. He wasn't just giving Sophia the company, he was forcing his children to legitimize her. He was making their financial futures contingent upon their acceptance of his secret life and their mother's replacement. Chloe shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "Never. I will never work for that woman. She destroyed our family. This is insane." Daniel remained seated, his mind racing. It was a humiliation. A public declaration that their father trusted his mistress more than his own blood. But $500 million. It was not just a fortune, it was power. The ability to shape his own destiny free from the shadow of his father. But the price was steep allegiance to Sophia, and by extension, betrayal of his mother. The letter continued addressing the children's inevitable conflict. "Daniel, you have my mind for business, but you lack my appetite for risk. You have been sheltered by the family name. Sophia will teach you what it means to build, not just to inherit. Chloe, you have your mother's charm, but also her focus on the superficial. You believe your name is a substitute for accomplishment. Working in a real corporate environment, one where your name earns you nothing but scrutiny, will be the making of you." He was forcing them to choose, not between right and wrong, but between 2 competing realities. On one side was their mother, Catherine deposed, humiliated, but still their mother, the symbol of the family they had always known. On the other was Sophia, the usurper, the mistress, but now also the gatekeeper to their future, the holder of all the corporate power. "The terms are as follows," Finch concluded, reading the final operational details. "You must remain employed by Davenport Future Ventures for a minimum of 5 continuous years. Your performance will be judged solely by Ms. Reed. At the end of 5 years, if she signs off on your professional competence, your trusts will be fully released into your control. If you refuse, or if you are terminated for cause before the 5 years are complete, the entire principal of your trust will be forfeited. It will be absorbed into a charitable foundation administered, of course, by Ms. Reed. Checkmate. He had left them with no way out. They could side with their mother and her rage, and in doing so forfeit a fortune and any chance at a role in their father's true legacy. Or they could swallow their pride, betray their mother, and work for the woman who had in their eyes torn their lives apart. The family was not just broken. It was strategically fractured, with Richard Davenport himself having drawn the fault lines from beyond the grave. The reading of the final condition shattered the room's fragile composure. The carefully contained tension erupted into open warfare. This is a farce. A travesty. Catherine's voice was hoarse with rage. She stood up, her entire body trembling. She pointed a finger not at Sophia, but at Alistair Finch. You were his creature. You helped him do this to humiliate me, to steal from my children, Catherine. I am merely the executor, Finch replied, his voice calm and unyielding. I am carrying out the legally notarized wishes of my client. I will fight this, she seethed. I will hire every lawyer in Boston. I will drag this through the courts for a decade. I will see this directive burned. Chloe rushed to her mother's side, glaring at Daniel, who was still seated, his face a mask of cold calculation. Daniel, say something. Are you going to let him do this to us? To Mom? Are you actually considering this? Before Daniel could answer, Finch held up a hand. There is one final clause, a procedural point, you might say. Richard anticipated this reaction. He looked directly at Catherine, his gaze unwavering. Richard included a standard, but in this case particularly potent, in terrorem clause. In layman's terms, a no-contest clause. He let the legal term hang in the air for a moment. It stipulates, he continued, his voice precise and surgical, that should any beneficiary, any one of you, formally contest any part of this will or its codicil in a court of law, your own inheritance in its entirety is immediately and automatically forfeited. The stipend, the house, the trusts, all of it. The forfeited assets are then to be immediately liquidated and the proceeds distributed amongst a list of charities he pre-selected. The Boston Children's Hospital, the New England Conservatory of Music, and the Sophia Reed Foundation for Urban Innovation. The final name was the ultimate insult. If Catherine fought, not only would she lose everything, but a portion of her fortune would go directly to a foundation bearing her rival's name. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. Richard had chained her to her own humiliation. To fight would be to complete her own financial destruction, and in a way to further enrich her enemy. Catherine stared at him, speechless. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a look of utter hollow defeat. She sank back into her chair, a broken woman. She had no moves left. Richard had thought of everything. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Chloe's quiet, angry sobs. It was Sophia who finally spoke. Her voice was not gloating or triumphant. It was quiet, firm, and possessed an authority that filled the power vacuum Richard's death had created. She looked at Daniel, and then at Chloe. Your father was a complicated man, she said, her gaze direct and unflinching. He was ruthless, and he could be cruel, but he loved what he built. He respected competence and vision above all else. He didn't want the empire he spent his life creating to be destroyed by pettiness or squandered by people who didn't understand the sacrifice it took to create it. She stood up, gathering her purse. He hasn't forced you to do anything. He has given you a choice. You can cling to the past and the story you've always been told, or you can embrace the future and the truth of what he created. The positions at Davenport Future Ventures are real. The work is real. My door will be open on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. She looked at Daniel. Your father believed you had potential, Daniel. He just wanted you to earn it. Then her gaze softened almost imperceptibly as she looked at Chloe. Your inheritance isn't just money. It's a chance to build something for yourself. Don't let pride be the thing that costs you your future. With that, she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. She had not raised her voice. She had not argued or defended herself. She had simply stated the new reality and left them to live in it. The immediate aftermath was a desolate landscape of familial ruin. Catherine was inconsolable, her rage having curdled into a bitter, impotent despair. She now saw the full scope of Richard's revenge. It wasn't about money. It was about narrative. He had taken the story she had built her life around the story of the powerful wife behind the great man, and he had systematically dismantled it, leaving her with nothing but a beautiful house filled with ugly truths. Chloe clung to her mother, her loyalty fierce, but her mind reeling from the choice she now faced. Daniel remained silent, staring at the empty space where Sophia had sat. His father had thrown down a gauntlet. It was an insult wrapped in an opportunity secured by a threat. He was a Davenport, and as much as he hated to admit it, he recognized the brutal, brilliant strategy of his father's final play. The question was no longer about family loyalty. It was about survival. It was about the future of the Davenport name. 6 months later, the gray chill of that October day had given way to the tentative warmth of a Boston spring. The city was emerging from its winter hibernation, but the seasons inside the Davenport family had shifted in far more dramatic ways. The grand mansion on Beacon Hill had become Catherine's gilded prison. The generous stipend Richard had left her was more than enough to maintain the house and its staff, but it couldn't fill the cavernous emptiness left by her shattered social standing. The story of the will reading had of course leaked. Whispers followed her at the few charity luncheons she dared to attend. The pity she had once commanded had been replaced by a more toxic mix of morbid curiosity and thinly veiled scorn. She spent her days consulting with lawyers who all told her the same thing: the will was ironclad. The no-contest clause had left her powerless. She was a queen in exile, ruling over a kingdom of one, her anger a cold and constant companion. Chloe had been her mother's shadow for those first few months. Her world narrowed to the 4 walls of the mansion. She was torn between a daughter's loyalty and the chilling reality of her own future. A life as her mother's caretaker, living off the interest of a trust she could never touch, seemed a bleak and suffocating prospect. The anger she felt towards Sophia was still there, but it was now competing with a growing resentment towards her father for forcing this impossible choice, and towards her mother for her refusal to see beyond her own wounded pride. On a bright Monday morning in April, Daniel Davenport walked through the gleaming glass doors of the Helios Tower, the headquarters of Davenport Future Ventures. Dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, he looked every bit his father's son, but his face was set with a grim determination all his own. After weeks of agonizing deliberation, he had made his choice. Legacy over loyalty. Future over past. He took the elevator to the 50th floor. The offices were a world away from the stuffy, mahogany-clad headquarters of the old Davenport Corporation. This was a space of open-plan layouts, glass walls, and buzzing collaborative energy. It felt like the future. Sophia's office was a corner suite with panoramic views of the city Richard had built. She was not sitting behind a large, imposing desk. Instead, she stood before a massive interactive screen analyzing schematics for a new waterfront development project. She turned as he entered, her expression professional, a hint of something unreadable in her eyes. "Daniel," she said, her voice even. "I was expecting you." "Ms. Reed," he replied, the name feeling foreign and formal. "I'm here to accept the position." There was no, "I told you so," no gloating. She simply nodded. "Good. Your title is Vice President of Strategic Development. Your father believed you had a keen eye for acquisitions. We'll see if he was right. Your first assignment is on that screen. It's a portfolio of undervalued industrial properties in the Seaport District. I want a full viability report on my desk in 2 weeks. I need to know if we can turn them into a new biomedical research hub." It was the very project her father had dismissed as too risky a year before his death. She was testing him, challenging him with his father's old blind spots. A flicker of something not quite admiration, but a grudging respect stirred in him. She wasn't playing games. She was building. He spent the next weeks buried in work, driven by a complex mix of ambition, spite, and a burgeoning, unexpected fascination with the business itself. He saw firsthand Sophia's brilliance, her encyclopedic knowledge of zoning laws, her intuitive grasp of market trends, her relentless work ethic. He began to understand why his father had trusted her. She wasn't the villain of his mother's story. She was a formidable force, and for the first time, Daniel realized that working under her might be the most valuable education he could ever receive. One evening, a month after Daniel started his new job, Chloe found her mother in the mansion's library, staring blankly at a legal document. The fight had gone out of Catherine's eyes, leaving only a brittle emptiness. Chloe looked at her mother, a woman trapped in a beautiful memory, and then thought of her brother, who was, for better or worse, moving forward. The next morning, Chloe Davenport walked into the Helios Tower. She asked the receptionist to see Ms. Reed. When she was shown into the office, she found Sophia and Daniel standing together, arguing amicably over a set of blueprints. They stopped when they saw her, a tense silence falling over the room. Chloe took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm not sure what I can do here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know anything about business. My father was right about that." She looked at Sophia, her eyes filled with a complicated mix of resentment and reluctant hope. "But I want to learn. Is there still a place for me?" Sophia studied her for a long moment. Then she gave a small, decisive nod. "Our new foundation needs a director for community outreach. It requires charm, social grace, and an ability to connect with people. Your father believed you had those skills. It's time you put them to use for something other than planning parties." A new fragile dawn was breaking. The ashes of the old Davenport family were settling, and from them something new and unexpected was beginning to grow. The future of Richard Davenport's legacy was not in the hands of his wife or his children alone, but in the tense, complicated, and powerful alliance of the three people he had bound together with his final brilliant and cruel masterpiece of a will. 18 months is a long time in business and a lifetime in the reconfiguration of a family. The raw, gaping wounds left by Richard Davenport's will had not healed, but had scarred over into a new and functional anatomy. The alliance between Sophia Reed and the Davenport children, forged in the crucible of a lawyer's office, had cooled from a molten state of necessity into something hard and surprisingly durable. It was not friendship, and it was certainly not family. It was a truce built on the solid bedrock of mutual interest and grudging respect. Daniel had become a formidable presence within Davenport Future Ventures. The Seaport Biomedical Hub, his first assignment, had become his obsession. He'd devoured every aspect of it, from the esoteric zoning variances to the complex financial modeling. He'd inherited his father's capacity for work, often staying in the office with Sophia until the city lights glittered below them like a fallen constellation. Their relationship was one of crisp, professional sparring. He'd challenge her assumptions, and she'd dismantle his arguments with surgical precision, forcing him to rebuild them stronger. In the process, he was learning more than any business school could have taught him. He was learning the difference between an inheritance and an enterprise. Chloe, to everyone's surprise, most of all, her own had blossomed. The Sophia Reed Foundation for Urban Innovation had become her domain. She'd shed the skin of the society princess and found a new identity in the gritty, rewarding work of community grants and educational programs. She discovered she had a genuine talent for connecting with people, for translating the corporate mission of the company into tangible good on the streets. The first time a local newspaper ran a feature on the foundation's work, they'd used a photo of Chloe breaking ground on a new youth center in Roxbury, her face bright with purpose dirt on her hands. When Catherine had seen it, she'd dismissed it with a sneer. Playing in the mud. How common. For Chloe, it had felt like a medal of honor. The truce, however, was about to be tested by an enemy from the past. The attack came not with a bang, but with a quiet, ominous tremor on the stock market. A sudden aggressive acquisition of Davenport Future Ventures stock by a series of anonymous holding companies. It was a clear prelude to a raid. An emergency meeting was called in the 50th floor conference room. Sophia stood before a screen displaying the stock's frantic activity. Daniel was beside her, his jaw tight, while Chloe sat at the table representing the foundation's significant non-voting share block. It's a classic pump and dump to accumulate shares before a takeover bid. Sophia said, her voice a low, dangerous calm. The volume is too high, the buying too coordinated. Someone is coming for us. Who has this kind of capital and a grudge against my father? Daniel mused aloud. The answer arrived the next morning in the form of a press release that sent shockwaves through Boston's financial district. Marcus Thorne Richards' oldest friend, the man who had delivered his eulogy, had formed a consortium of investors. He was making a public hostile bid for a controlling interest in Davenport Future Ventures. His statement was a masterpiece of corporate aggression veiled in concern. He spoke of honoring Richard's true legacy and stabilizing the company after a period of unconventional leadership. The insinuation was clear: Sophia was the usurper, and he was the rightful successor, the loyal friend saving the empire from the mistress. The sanctimonious hypocrite Daniel snarled, throwing the newspaper onto the conference table. He was my father's partner for 30 years. He knows all our old vulnerabilities. Worse than that, Sophia said, her eyes dark with calculation. He's timed this perfectly. We just leveraged heavily for the next phase of the Seaport project. Our cash reserves are low, making a stock buyback difficult, and his bid is deliberately pitched just high enough to tempt our institutional investors. He didn't just decide to do this yesterday. He's had help. He's had inside information. For 2 days, they worked around the clock, digging through a mountain of data, searching for a leak, a digital trail that would explain how Thorne knew exactly where and when to strike. The company's cybersecurity was robust. It had to be an inside job, but not from an employee. The information was too high-level a combination of financial strategy and personal knowledge of the Davenport family dynamics. Late on the second night, Daniel was cross-referencing offshore data transfers against a list of his father's old personal accounts when he saw it. A series of small encrypted payments from a Cayman Islands account controlled by Marcus Thorne. They were made over the past 6 months to a shell corporation, a corporation Daniel recognized with a sickening lurch in his stomach. It was the same one his mother had used years ago, the one his father had mentioned in his will, the one she had used to try and sabotage the Helios Tower. The blood drained from his face. "Oh God," he whispered. Sophia looked up from her own screen. "What is it?" He couldn't speak. He just turned his laptop around his finger, trembling as he pointed to the name of the recipient shell corporation. Sophia's eyes widened, first in confusion, then in dawning, ice-cold horror. Chloe, who had been organizing press statements, walked over to see what was wrong. She read the name on the screen and her hand flew to her mouth. The call had been made from the inside, but not from inside the company. It had come from inside the house on Beacon Hill. The drive to the mansion was silent and grim. Daniel felt a cold fury he had never known, a rage so profound it felt like a physical illness. He walked into the library without knocking. Catherine was sitting by the fire, a glass of sherry in her hand, looking out at the manicured garden. She looked elegant, regal, and utterly toxic. Why Daniel's voice was a raw, strangled sound. She turned her expression devoid of surprise. There was a flicker of bitter triumph in her eyes. "So you found out." I wondered how long it would take his brilliant protégé. "Why, Mother?" he repeated, his voice shaking. "Thorn is trying to destroy us, to destroy your children's future." "He isn't destroying it," she replied, her voice dangerously calm. "He's restoring it. Marcus understands the proper order of things. He will take control from her, and when he does, he will install Daniel on the board, as is his birthright. The company will return to its rightful family. The delusion was so complete, so absolute, that it staggered him. He's a corporate raider, Mother. He will carve up the company and sell it for parts. He will fire everyone. There will be nothing left." "Did you give him the financial data?" "The Seaport vulnerability reports. I gave him what was necessary to correct a great wrong," she said, rising to her feet, her voice swelling with the pent-up venom of the last 2 years. "Your father stole my life's work and gave it to a whore. I am simply taking it back. This is my company, my legacy." In that moment, Daniel saw his mother not as a victim, but as the author of her own destruction. She was so consumed by her hatred for Sophia that she would burn her own children's inheritance to the ground just to watch her rival suffocate in the smoke. The last vestiges of his filial duty turned to ash. He walked back into the Helios Tower just before dawn. Sophia and Chloe were waiting, their faces pale with exhaustion and dread. He didn't need to say a word. They saw the answer in his haunted eyes. Chloe began to cry silent tears of grief for a mother she had finally and completely lost. Daniel walked to the window overlooking the harbor, where the skeletal framework of his seaport project was just visible in the gray morning light. Everything he had worked for, everything they had built in this fragile truce, was on the verge of being annihilated by the ghost of the past. Sophia came to stand beside him. Her expression was no longer shocked or angry. It was transformed, hardened, into the steely resolve of a commander on the eve of battle. She chose her side. Sophia said, her voice quiet but resonant with power. "Now we choose ours." She looked from Daniel to Chloe, her gaze binding them together. "He's started a war based on our past, but he has no idea what we're capable of now. He thinks he's fighting Richard's mistress and his spoiled children. He's wrong." She turned to face the rising sun, which was beginning to paint the sky in strokes of orange and gold over the city. "He's fighting the new Davenport Corporation, and Richard Davenport taught me how to win his wars. So what happens when the dust settles from a war like this? Richard Davenport didn't just leave behind a will. He left a battlefield and a new set of rules. A family was shattered, but a legacy was secured, placed in the hands of the one person he believed could carry it forward. The story of Catherine Sophia Daniel and Chloe is a stark reminder that the deepest secrets are often hidden in plain sight, and the truth, when it's finally revealed, can be more devastating and more liberating than any lie. Was Richard a cruel manipulator or a brilliant strategist protecting his life's work? Was Sophia a cunning opportunist or a deserving partner finally getting her due? The lines are blurred, and the answer depends on who you ask. If this story of secrets, lies, and the ultimate revenge captivated you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a good drama. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you won't miss our next story. What do you think Daniel and Chloe should have done? Let us know in the comments below.